Good morning, welcome back to the channel. Hope everyone had a great weekend. It's Monday, Halloween. I'm coming to you from a disclosed location. I am a red M&M today. Hope everybody's ready for the kids tonight, unless you all had yours over the weekend, which a lot of times now they do. Let's just go ahead and try and enjoy these holidays. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about some things that people mention on their videos. A lot of times, you know, it's hard to get, and I'm just going to try to explain. One of those words is the ball revving up and the ball slowing down. So first, for the revving up, what we're trying to do when we're bowling is trying to get a ball to retain its energy into the pins, to keep as much of the energy at release going through the pins. There are many reasons why the ball bleeds energy down the lane. There are obviously, as we know, three phases of ball motion going down the lane. The first is the skid phase, then you have the hook phase, and then you have the roll phase. The skid phase, for most of us, we don't see that when we release the ball because it's usually within the first 10-15 feet after release of the ball. A good way to see that, though, is to go ahead and video yourself throwing the ball and slow it down, and you'll see the balls basically hydroplaning on the surface, and it's not, you know, starting to rev up yet. Now, core, cover, and friction affect when a ball, and also drilling too, affects when a ball starts to rev up. So we want to retain this energy basically as it goes down the lane. The skid phase will basically get to about here, and then we have the hook phase. Now this does not mean that the ball gets here and then just starts hooking. It's just in the revving up and hooking phase to where it's seeing the lane. Like a solid ball, for instance. Solid covers tend to bleed their energy throughout the pattern. So the key is to try to get that ball to hold its energy. How do you hold its energy? You play in the oil. If you get it to the friction, it's going to read that friction, it's going to turn, it's going to bleed energy, and a lot of times get to the pin to where it's the pins to where it's just flat and has no energy, and that's when you start, you know, leaving those dreaded 10s, you know, 10-7s, things like that. Or it'll deflect off the 9, and, you know, you start leaving 8s. Multiple things happen there. So yeah, it's affected by, you know, multiple things, but what we're trying to do is to get that ball to hold that energy. So let's say we have our break point, you know, right around here. So up into this point, we want the ball to retain as much energy as it can, but then get into that roll phase before it makes its turn to go into the pins. The roll is gonna give you the best chance for striking. Not that you'll strike every time, but it's gonna give you the best chance for striking. How to think of it is, if you had, say, snow tires on a car, this is a solid cover ball. The tires are actually digging through the snow and coming into surface with the pavement to give you traction. This is what a solid ball is going to do. A solid ball will get through the oil and get into contact with the lane to give you some traction. But this also means that if it's getting traction, say, starting here, from here to here, it's bleeding energy. So if it starts off at, say, 100% here, by the time it gets down here, it can get as low as, you know, 60%. Now, when the ball gets into contact with the friction at the end of the pattern and goes to make its turn, the ball slows down the turn. And this will also bleed some energy. So then by the time you get to the pins, it has less energy than when it did here when it got into the hook phase. So the key is to try to retain that energy and as much of it as you can with core options, cover options, and drilling options. There are multiple things that can help you maintain this energy going through the pins. The more energy through the pins, the better chance of striking. Now, if you were to throw that same ball, say your cliff is right here, usually around the 10 to 12 board, 8 on most house shots. if you were to throw the ball to here to the friction, now obviously it's got a certain amount of energy here, and as it gets down the lane, it's losing energy, and then it turns here into friction and hits that friction. As it makes the turn, it's losing its energy, and now it still has this distance to get there. It's still going to bleed energy by the time it gets to the pins and what they call rollout. So what we want to do is we want to use the oil to your advantage. The oil will help retain that energy as the ball goes down the lane. A pearl cover stock, the scenario, it's like a slick. So like if you had a slick on your car and you're on snow, it's not going to dig through the oil. It's just going to hydroplane. Well, that's what a pearl does for you. A pearl, as this oil starts to deplete and it'll stay on top of that, whatever oil's there, and it won't lose as much energy. Therefore, retains more energy by the time it gets to your break point, and that's also why pearls react harder off of the end of the pattern, because they have so much more stored energy. We do not want, a solid to boomerang. Most of the time, solids are for control. You want to be able to have a nice smooth motion off the back end, and this is where, drilling comes into it. So the first number on a dual angle is the drill angle. What this tells you or helps you with is how quickly the ball gets into that revving up stage. So say your skid phase is to about here with a drill angle of, let's say, 20. Okay, so the closer you get to 10, the earlier it revs up. So if your ball is revving up here, but you look like you have decent motion through the pins, but you're just not able to retain enough energy, if you put, say, a 60, 70 drill angle on that ball, what it's going to do is keep it in that skid phase a little bit longer before it starts to read the pattern and rev up, therefore retaining more energy by the time it gets through the pins. Now, obviously, this isn't as important on a symmetrical ball. Obviously, it's not important at all anymore since they got rid of weight holes. But on an asymmetric ball, this will help that ball bleed less energy in the fronts. Even if you're playing in the oil, it will help retain some more of that energy and then get down further before it starts revving up. Therefore, retains the energy, smooth motion, more energy going through the pins. When would you want to have the ball rev up early? Obviously, if you're playing in the oil, you can get the ball revving up early because the oil is going to help carry that ball down there and retain a little more of its energy. As you get closer to the friction, you do not want a drill angle of 20. If you have a drill angle of 20 and it's already revving up right here and you get it to that friction too soon, it's going to burn up, it's going to overreact, and it's not going to have much energy going into the pins. So you can get away with a drill angle on a pearl of 20 because a pearl hydroplanes, but it also does respond a little bit harder to friction, so you'll get more angle, but it will retain a little more energy going through the pins. And this is why some people can get away with using pearls on fresh house shots. It just depends on your rotation, your speed, and what part of the lane you like to play. Now, as far as getting a ball to slow down, what they're talking about is if you're, say you throw a pearl, here's the case, a pearl on a fresh house shot, it's going to hydroplane on that oil and it's going to start turning, and you'll see that ball turning and turning and turning and turning and turning and turning and turning. It never slows down. It's just, even when it gets to the end and hits the friction, that ball has close to the same amount of revs as when it was at, say, 15 feet. It still is turning and turning and turning and turning, and then when it hits that friction, it boomerangs, and a lot of people like to see that motion. I have a few friends that like to see that hockey stick stuff. That's how you get it. You keep that ball in the oil down the lane. Don't get it to the friction too early, and by the time it gets to the back and in, it's going to still have a ton of stored energy, and it's going to take off. The problem with that, though, is a lot of times, depending on the length of the pattern, if your pattern is, say, here, when that ball makes that turn, it don't have time to get into the roll. It's entering the pocket in the in the hook phase. So it didn't get into the roll. You can get multiple scenarios when that happens. It can keep driving through the pins. That's when you leave the 9 pin, it goes right on by it. It can deflect because it's not in a forward roll. But like I said, a lot of people like to do this. Like I said, the best scenario though is solid on fresh house shots, just because they do blend the wet dry. And the key with that is trying to maintain that energy down through the lane. If you're throwing a big asymmetric ball and you see that ball, it's got the right motion and everything, but you're leaving 10 pins, most likely it's burning up. It's bleeding its energy all the way through here. And by the time it turns that corner, it's got like 40%, 30% of its energy left to go through the pins. So you need to go to something that's a little bit cleaner. Maybe you just have too much surface on that ball. You may have to, take it from 1,000 to 3,000. This way it won't dig through the snow as much. So it won't bleed as much energy through here. We do not want the energy bleeding in here. The only time you want energy bleeding in here is on a short pattern, let's say 36 feet, because you got so much room back here for the ball to roll. You need to get that ball to read earlier. You need it to bleed a little bit in here so it doesn't have as much energy. You don't want a lot of motion back here on a short pattern. But anyway, I hope that helps. If you have any questions on this or anything else, just go ahead and put it down in the comments. Remember to subscribe and like and share. We will catch you all next time, and may the strikes be ever in your favor.